Good afternoon. I'm Ann Claire Williams, a former judge of the Seventh Circuit, and I have the great pleasure of joining you today for the second day of the 2020 Equal Justice Works Job and Career Fair. Equal Justice Works is an organization near and dear to me. In 1991, I created a Cypre Award, funds from an antitrust case, and transferred them to Equal Justice Works. This seed money allowed the organization to create postgraduate fellowships that we began with only 7 fellowships. And that's why I'm often called the mother of Equal Justice Works. Today, more than 2,000 bright lawyers have been awarded Equal Justice Fellowships to fulfill our nation's promise of equal justice to all. So I am a longtime supporter of this wonderful organization, having served on the board of directors for 11 years, and I'm honored once again to be part of the conference and career fair. I'm also pleased to host for the second time for this conference, the 82nd Attorney General of the United States, Eric Holder, a conversation about his lifelong commitment to public service. Mr. Holder was appointed by President Obama and was the first African American to hold that position. Welcome, Eric. Since we're long-term friends, I think I can call you that instead of Mr. General.
All right, but I'm still going to call you Judge. I'm not going to take it. I'm not taking any chances. Never fool around with a judge. It's good to see you, Judge.
But you too have been a supporter of Equal Justice Works. You served on the board of directors, and you have long championed our causes. What and why is the mission of Equal Justice Work so critical at this time to our nation, when we're in the middle of a pandemic, dealing with systemic racial injustice and facing issues of voter suppression for the upcoming election?
Well, I tell you, the organization is one that has always focused on our nation, tried to identify the problems that exist in the nation at that time, and try to come up with ways in which those problems were dealt with, and at the same time, exposed young people to careers in that kind of problem solving. And I would say that this is a time more than ever that we need organizations like Equal Justice Works. I mean, the problems are the ones that you have just detailed. This is a nation that is in crisis in so many different ways, but we have a great deal of resources that we can turn to, not the least of which are the young people in this nation. And through Equal Justice Works, they are put on a path and hopefully maybe careers in solving these kinds of issues. And so I was proud to be a part of Equal Justice Works formally when I was on the board, and I've always been a supporter of this great organization.
And you mentioned how important it is to young people, and let's go back to when you were a young person, because when you were growing up, you didn't realize, or did you? You never dreamed of being Attorney General. You never foresaw, did you, that you would have this career in public service?
No, I never did. And just to correct the record, you say when I was young. I'm still young at heart.
I see. Young at heart. Well, I think we're both young, actually.
Well, but I never thought be Attorney General. I never even thought that I wanted to be a lawyer. You know, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do when I was growing up in New York. Even when I got to college, I was still not totally sure I wanted to be a lawyer. And even when I went to law school, I wasn't sure that I was going to ultimately practice law. But when I took criminal law in my first year, that ultimately made me think that I wanted to be a lawyer, a litigator, and ultimately a prosecutor. But it wasn't something that, immediately leapt to mind. I wasn't surrounded in my neighborhood with people who were professionals, and I didn't have a sense that a young black guy from New York could ever be a lawyer, much less the Attorney General of the United States.
But one of the things your dad said to you, and I think it's something that stuck with you, you're as good as anybody else. Don't let anybody push you around. And you took that advice to heart.
Yeah, I certainly did. He's a man who didn't finish high school, but I think is the wisest person I've ever known. And he understood that unless you have a faith in yourself And unless you're willing to confront those people who will try to put you down and keep you down, you're never actually going to get ahead. And I took from him, in the way he pushed education on me and my brother, a love for education, and also a desire to be all that I possibly could be. And so he was an instrumental part, a very influential part of my life.
And that, what your dad told you, is something that our students should never forget, right? To be as good as they can be and to not let anybody push them around. And so with that philosophy, you changed neighborhoods. You actually lived in your own neighborhood, but you went from Queens to Stuyvesant High School, which was predominantly white high school, and an hour's ride. You were a scholar, you played basketball, but it was a different environment. It was during the height of the civil rights movement. How did the civil rights movement influence your life and where you were in school?
Well, when I was growing up, the civil rights demonstrations were going on all around the country, and it was the kind of thing that was a part of my life. You'd go to school and, take a long train ride into New York, into Manhattan, long train ride back to Queens. And so played basketball, did all the things that that every kid does. But at that time, you turn on the news and you saw the demonstrations going on. You saw civil rights demonstrators, being hosed down, being attacked by dogs, by white people in law enforcement trying to keep African Americans from getting the rights to which they were entitled. I saw in June of 1963 a young woman integrate the University of Alabama when the governor of that state stood in the door and wasn't going to let her register there, little knowing that I was going to marry her sister, many years down the road. So it was something that was it was a good time, I think, to be a young person, to get a sense, especially a black young person, to get a sense of progress, a sense of demands that for too long had not been met, a desire, for equality. All of that was burned into me at a young age, and has certainly stayed with me throughout my life.
And so we're in a similar situation now with this country, with all the turmoil. And standing up was also something very important to you. And I see that picture of you with that afro. And at one time, you actually led a sit-in the president's office at Columbia, right?
Yeah, we had a couple of takeovers while I was at Columbia. We took over the vacant Naval ROTC office and converted it into a black student lounge, which still exists at Columbia. This was back in, I guess, my freshman year in college. I went back to Columbia just last year, and it's called the Malcolm X Lounge now, and it is still a gathering place for black students around the campus. What we thought was that there was not a place for young kids of color to come together, socialize, study together, and we saw that vacant office and made a demand of the administration that we have access to that space, and they agreed to it and have maintained it. And the other demonstrations, I guess, and takeovers that we were engaged in were to try to get more money from the school by way of scholarships and financial assistance for black kids who were coming from circumstances that did not allow them to pay for or to comfortably pay for the education they were receiving at Columbia. And again, Columbia was extremely responsive to our demonstrations.
And it shows, doesn't it, that as a young person, you can make a difference and you can take a stand. And it turned out that I think it was the dean or the president at the time of the takeover ended up being your recommender for law school, right?
That was a little presumptuous of me, a little cheeky. One of the offices that we took over was Dean Henry Coleman, a great man who I took over his office, I think his freshman year. And then when I became a junior, I asked him to write my law school recommendation. But Columbia being Columbia, Dean Coleman being Dean Coleman, he wrote my law school recommendations. And we both received awards. I guess it was the highest award the college can give you on the same night, many years later. And I remarked about the fact that I was getting an award at the same time that the dean did, and that he made my life possible by ignoring the fact that I took over his office as an undergraduate.
But of course, part of that, I think, was you showed courage and strength, and you were reasonable as you all dealt with your demands. And so he recognized something in you, something that I think our audience, our law students, should think about. Just because you stand up doesn't mean you are closing the door on all your career opportunities. There are ways to stand up when you can. You later went on, and we're just going to breeze through your early career because you worked at the Department of Justice. You ultimately became a judge on the Superior Court in the District of Columbia, appointed by President Reagan. You then became the U.S. Attorney in the District of Columbia and then Deputy Attorney General. You worked under Janet Reno, the first woman Attorney General. What was that like?
Oh, that was great. She was a unique person. She was my boss, ultimately became my friend. She was a person who, not wise maybe in the ways of Washington, D.C., and I thought that was great. She didn't really have time for political things. She focused on making sure that we decided cases and put policies in place on the basis of the law, the facts, and the needs of the people that we were supposed to serve. She was incorruptible. She was a good example for me to see as a young lawyer, to see her operating in the way that she did, and as Deputy Attorney General, to see what a good Attorney General could be. She passed away just a few years ago, and I miss her now, because even when I was Attorney General, I stayed in touch with her, called her on the phone to just ask her questions about things that I was confronting, asking how she might deal with those issues. She was a great friend and a wonderful mentor.
And of course, those were very long hours that you worked. And it was after you became a judge. I just want to go back for a minute. You met the love of your life, Dr. Sharon Malone. You have 3 children. In fact, one of your kids helped you set up your GoPro for this conversation. And you made this statement: being a good father is every bit as demanding and every bit as important as being the Attorney General. Why? And how did you achieve that balance?
Well, I achieved that balance with the help of my wife, who, maybe did a little more than she should have been called upon to do. The sacrifices that she made, and she's a very accomplished doctor, but she was also a person who, at least during parts of my career, was primarily responsible for the raising of our kids, which gave me time to do a lot of things with my career. But if you don't have the ability to look back on the raising of your kids and say that I've done a good job there, I think you have failed at job one. I mean, you have to make sure that, within your home, your kids are cared for, that they are given the attention that they need, that they're given the confidence that they are in need of as well. And certainly, what my father gave to me. And so, that work-life balance is always something that is difficult to achieve. And I'm proud of the things that I achieved as Attorney General, but I'm most proud of Eric, Maya, and Brooke. They are, the best testament to a life well led by me.
Yeah, they are your heart for sure.
Yep.
And you squeezed in, after working for Attorney General Janet Reno, 8 years at Covington and now at Covington. Sometimes people think, well, if you're at big law, how can you do public interest work? Can you answer that question?
Well, I would say, and you understand this, Judge, I mean, no matter where you are, you should be a public interest lawyer. I can be a partner at a great law firm like Covington and Burling and still be a public interest lawyer. Covington prides itself on the amount of pro bono hours that lawyers in the firm are expected to engage in. And, we do a variety of things, from death penalty cases, landlord-tenant disputes, attacking the cash bail system, a wide range of things. And so it doesn't matter whether you're working in government, whether you're working in a corporation, whether you're working in a big law firm. You should always be finding a way to be engaged in pro bono, community-based activities and give something back. I mean, certainly, defend your clients, corporate clients, big clients. I mean, that's fine. But you are a public interest lawyer, or you should be a public interest lawyer, even if you are working in a commercial setting. I mean, public interest lawyers are not only, public defenders or people working for neighborhood legal services. No, as a partner at Covington and Burling, I consider myself a public interest lawyer.
And these young lawyers, young law students who are at this career fair looking for public interest jobs, this is so important to realize the alliances you build with lawyers in private practice. A lot of the hours, just like in Jones Day, are pro bono hours, helping the very not-for-profit groups that many of you aspire to work with. You became Attorney General under President Barack Obama, and that was quite a moment for you. And I see that basketball being spun around. Was that the president?
No, I'm holding onto a ball. I think that's at an event that I was doing with Kareem Abdul-Jabbar.
Oh, okay.
We were actually at the Department of Education doing an event with Arnie Duncan. And I was there with the greatest player of all time. Michael Jordan is good and all that stuff. Kareem is the greatest basketball player of all time.
But I hear that you all did have some basketball games.
Every now and again, but he's 10 years younger than me, in much better shape than I was. And you don't, advice to young people, you never want to be better than your boss. If he's a very competitive person in a particular physical activity, let him or her win.
As you did with the president. Now,
I'm not saying, I'm just making that observation.
Right. You had some key initiatives, voting rights, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. But interesting, the Defense of Marriage Act, you announced DOJ would no longer defend those cases 2 years before the Supreme Court found it unconstitutional. In terms of indigent defendants, you established a new office, the Access to Justice Initiative, and published an op-ed about the need of prosecutors to support indigent defense. This was a very important cause to you, and I know you also funded some Equal Justice Works fellows to work for public defenders. Why was it important for the DOJ, prosecutor's office, to make this kind of commitment?
Well, I think the Attorney General specifically and the Justice Department more generally, we are stewards of the justice system. And it's not only about convicting people and suing people successfully on behalf of the United States government. We also have a responsibility to the justice systems in our country. And I thought that it was important to make sure that with regard to criminal justice, for instance, that there was adequate resources provided to people on the defense side. That way we could ensure that fair trials actually occur. And so it seemed to me that to the extent that I had influence and the ability to direct, federal funds to the other side, which seems a little, counterintuitive. But again, if you think of yourself as a steward of the system, not only just a player in the system, but a person who had to take care of that system, it made a lot of sense to me. And what I found in the Justice Department were a lot of lawyers who shared that view. And I wasn't sure when I proposed those programs and said, this is what I want to do, this is where I'm going to, the way I want to steer the department, that I would get a lot of support from the career people in the department. And I did. I got a lot of support from people who wanted to be engaged in these activities and who saw, as well as I did, that they had a job to make sure not only to win cases and to protect the interests of the American people, but also to make sure that the criminal justice system, the civil justice system, was adequately funded and well run.
And your core value was that you wanted fair prosecutions. You wanted agents to follow the rules. You wanted your lawyers to follow the rules. And so that was so critical. I want to turn to one of the things that we had listed, your voter initiative, but just to give a very brief overview of the history of intimidation and violence in this country, the lynching, the poll taxes, the property ownership tests that pervaded our country. And then the Voting Rights Act in 1965 in Section 5, which was such a wonderful section because it meant pre-clearance of the changes in various voting laws in states, in counties. Certain states were identified, and it was actually extended by 5 presidents. It had an impact, that Voting Rights Act, because when you look at the gap between whites and blacks, at least from this 65 to 2012 survey, you see the numbers going up, and the numbers were continuing to go up until that Supreme Court decision, Shelby County versus Holder. The impact of that decision was immediate and instant. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, the Shelby County case essentially gutted the Voting Rights Act of 1965, and that act is the crown jewel of the civil rights movement. It is that act that really made sure that Black people, too long denied their right to vote, actually had the ability to cast a ballot and were full participants in our democracy. You saw the number of people who were elected and who were of color go up dramatically in the South and actually all around the country. You saw Black voter participation go up, just tremendously. It was a democracy building act. Supreme Court, and I think one of its worst decisions, gutted the act in spite of the fact that Congress had looked at the need for the renewal of the act, in spite of the fact that a Republican president had signed the renewal. Thousands of pages of findings, almost unanimously passed by both houses of our Congress. The Supreme Court gutted the act, and as a result of that, that let the states free to do exactly what it is they did. Almost immediately after the Shelby County decision, 25 states started putting in place these unnecessary photo ID laws. Voter rolls were purged. Polling places were closed. Since the Shelby County decision, about 1,700 polling places have been closed around the country, primarily in communities of color or in poor communities. And it's had a dramatic impact. Very interesting in just the most recent primaries in Atlanta. If you look at white areas as opposed to African American areas and the waiting times in the evening on the day of the primary, white folks had to wait 6 minutes in order to cast a ballot. African Americans had to wait 51 minutes had to wait in line 51 minutes to cast a vote. And that's just one of the ways in which the removal of the Voting Rights Act has had a very concrete result. It's something that I think was a terrible decision. It's had a terrible impact, and hopefully, with a new Congress, a new president, a revitalized Voting Rights Act can be put in place.
And so there's much fear about the 2020 election. And remember, the Supreme Court had another decision with respect to Wisconsin when deep in COVID and they just wanted a couple days to delay the mail-in ballots, and the Supreme Court said no. So again, long lines.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at, the Wisconsin decision in particular, I mean, you in essence had, the state telling its citizens that you had to wait in line, long lines, very long lines, to cast a vote in the middle of a pandemic. I mean, what sense could that possibly make? The governor wanted to come up with a mechanism that would postpone things, do things in a way that would protect the health of the citizens of the state. And the court system said, no, we're not going to do that. Republican legislators said, we're not going to allow that to happen. It was all for political gain. But these are the kinds of things that we have to face in the absence of a really robust Voting Rights Act. So hopefully, as I said, a new Voting Rights Act will be put in place.
And this, the ballot issue, the post office, all these attacks, the issue of felons who, like in Florida, the state voted that they could vote, and now they're being required to pay all their fines and fees. I mean, there really is an assault on voting in this country. And there are some that would say, well, that's because there's all this voter fraud. But there was a commission created in May of 18, and it was disbanded. I think it should be January of 19, because there was no evidence of it. And one of the charges you've been given in the Biden campaign is special litigation liaison, and I believe that relates to voting. Is that right?
Yeah, to try to deal with voter issues that people will face both on election day and before. Again, just to try to make the system fair and give everybody access to polling places. And so to the extent that there are issues or problems that are identified, we're going to have lawyers who will be able to get there and try to resolve these things in a fair way, but also to deal with things that might happen after Election Day. Making sure that all the ballots that are cast by mail are counted, to make sure that things are done just, again, in a fair and appropriate way. So we're trying to gear up, trying to anticipate all the negative things that we might have to confront. And so we've got lawyers really all around the country prepared to spring into action to make sure that this election in 2020 is a fair one, because this is an existential election. The United States has a choice when it comes to these elections as to what direction this nation is going to go in. And if that's the case, if this is as important an election as I think it is, we have to try to do all that we can to make sure that the election processes are fair.
And what role can these law students play in helping to ensure we have a fair election?
Well, I'd say a couple of things. One, you certainly try to look at organizations that are going to need help. You're never too young. I mean, young people need to understand you can have a huge impact. Even if you're a law student, but you're not a lawyer, you can still have a huge impact. I mean, you got to remember, just looking back at our own country, this nation was moved in its revolutionary days by young people. The founding fathers are all young people, except for Ben Franklin. They're all young people. Thomas Jefferson wrote, the Declaration of Independence when he was in his 30s, and all the people around him, again, all young people. So never take yourself out of the game simply because you're young. So young law students, I think, can associate themselves with organizations that are engaged in this fight. But even beyond that, young people, perhaps a little more resistant to the impact of the virus, can replace some older people as poll workers. We're going to have a substantial number of people manning the polls and doing so in a safe and a healthy way. And that's another thing that young people could do. Older people are maybe more susceptible to the ravages of the virus. Younger people could perhaps take their place. So I would say associate yourself with organizations that are fighting to make sure that it's fair. I mean, Stacey Abrams' organization, Fair Fight, that's one I would certainly consider. And then think about, in the jurisdiction where you're residing, see whether or not you could be a poll worker.
Right. And then we have When We All Vote, Michelle Obama, More Than a Vote, LeBron James. There's lots of great organizations. And so there are resources. I just wanted to post the Legal Defense Fund website. I know you were on that board. I'm on that board now. Lots of resources there that go state by state that give you an idea of what can be done and how you can help. The other thing that you've been working on is the Electoral College. And we know when we look at what happened in the election in 2016, and also I believe Bush versus Gore, even though Hillary Clinton won the popular vote, she didn't get the Electoral College. And this is another thing that you are working on, not at the moment because you're focused so much on voting, but can you just talk about your efforts and why this has to be changed to make things fair?
Yeah, I mean, I think, when it comes to electing the president, the preeminent office in the land, it would make sense to have the people simply elect who the president is. Just count all the votes, and whoever gets the most votes should be president. That's the way we decide who the governor is in a particular state, how we decide who the mayor is in our cities, who even serves on school boards. The only office where we have this kind of weird systems with regard to who the president is. And it leads to results like the ones you've talked about. Our electoral college system allows people who didn't get the majority of the vote, to become president. So you end up with President Bush, you end up with President Trump. Now, I think that, we ought to come up with ways in which we work around that. And so there's a thing called the Interstate Compact, where states have signed up and say that what they're going to do is cast their electoral votes not for the popular vote winner in their state, but for the popular vote winner in the country. And if enough states totaling 270 electoral votes agree to do that, well, then the Electoral College really becomes meaningless, because 270 votes in those states would go to the winner of the national popular vote. I think that makes a lot more sense, but it also would have the impact of making candidates campaign and give attention to states that don't get attention now. States like California, New York, Texas. Republicans don't campaign in New York or in California. Democrats tend not to campaign in Texas. Instead, they're in states that, they're wonderful people, Iowa, New Hampshire, all these swing states that get a lot of attention. We have a relatively small population, while the population centers don't get the necessary attention. So you'd have really nationwide campaigns, and you'd end up with a result that I think people would be more satisfied with. Whoever got the greatest number of votes would be the person who would be president.
Yeah, because the Electoral College right now is capped. Even if your population grows and grows and grows into the million, there are caps on how many votes you have in the college. when we look at this, the impact of this and the voter suppression issue, and this pandemic has just highlighted, I mean, really it's a national nightmare. People are desperate. They're looking for hope. And one of the things you said on this whole issue of the pandemic, you said we can't bemoan our fate. You asked, how can we improve the lives of those who are suffering through this? How can we address these issues of inequality, injustice, and unfairness that the pandemic has helped to make even more apparent?
Well, the pandemic has, I think you're right, has revealed for people in the country who didn't realize it before, the inequities that exist in a whole variety of areas, not the least of which is our healthcare system, where we have seen, the virus ravage communities of color in ways that it has not done as much damage to other communities. And so I think that, we have got to look at that which the pandemic has revealed and try to, come up with ways in which we deal with those healthcare inequities, criminal justice system inequities, housing inequities, educational inequities. I mean, we're seeing all of this stuff. Young people in poor communities don't have as much access to Wi-Fi, and therefore can't do remote learning as well as other students. I mean, this has revealed a whole range of things. Well, now that it's been revealed, we certainly have to beat the virus. I mean, that's, if we have to do that, that's the only way we get our economy back in shape and all the other things that I've discussed. And so that, I think, requires, leadership. It requires leadership that understands that the American people are a lot tougher, I think, than people have come to understand. When we're asked to make sacrifices and we've been given goals, goals that people understand, American people can sacrifice. I mean, that's what we've done when it comes to wars, depressions before, and we can do it. We can do it again. Once that is done, and we've gotten the virus, we got the virus beat, well, then I think we should turn our attention to that which the virus has revealed, and with that same determination, finally try to deal with those inequalities that we find in all the other parts of our society and get us to that better place, that we always say that we're trying to get to, that more perfect union that we talk about so much, but do, I think, too little, too frequently.
Yeah, and I was just looking at a recent statistic showing the growing number of billionaires in this country and where people are during the pandemic and how the gap is just growing greater. And this whole issue of poverty that really pervades each of those issues you discussed. And then, as if the pandemic wasn't enough, then we have the horrific murder of George Floyd. And that was a day. And how, something we can never forget. How did that horrific murder affect you and your children? And do you think that the George Floyd moment has now turned into a movement?
Well, I got to tell you, that 8 minutes and 46 seconds has had I think, dramatic impact on the nation. People now understand why there's a need for a Black Lives Matter movement, because for too long in this country, Black lives did not matter. And it's time for Black lives to matter. Yeah, we certainly have a moment. This nation has been galvanized, and people of all ethnicities, all races have been in the streets protesting and demanding fair treatment for people of color in our justice system. I saw a Pew study that showed that, the majority of the people who are marching are not Black. The majority of the people who are marching are in fact white. And I think that's a really great sign. It's a great sign that we have a moment, a moment of consciousness. But the question is, what are we going to do with this moment? What are we going to do with all this energy that we have that's out there in the streets? How do we channel that energy in the way that we did during the civil rights era, when we had, huge demonstrations, that iconic I Have a Dream speech in front of 250,000 people during the March on Washington? All that was channeled into the Civil Rights Act of 64, the Voting Rights Act of 65, the Fair Housing Act. Well, identifying the problems we have now, what are we going to do to channel that energy into long-lasting legislated change? And so I hope that people understand that marching is just a tactic. It's not a destination. The question is, what are we going to do with that marching to make concrete, long-lasting changes? So I think I'm cautiously optimistic that we can make this happen, because I think young people are again involved in ways that they have not been fairly recently. And if we take the physical abilities that young people have, the commitment that young people have, the idealism that young people have, translate that into positive action, I really think that we can make something really good of this of that tragedy in Minneapolis.
And then and also the whole policing issue is now come to the forefront. And as you said, officers who stood by and watched him die either did not receive training that empowered them to intercede or lacked the humanity to get involved. And this inaction has to be called out and people held liable. Good cops pay the price for this. And Mr. Floyd paid with his life. And so you also said 6 years after Ferguson and Eric Garner, have we made the progress? And I love this quote as well. It's similar to what you just said. We have an opportunity now. We can't squander the chance to ask hard, tough questions of ourselves and put in place concrete measures to make the promise of democracy real. What, in terms of policing, are some of the concrete measures that you think could be put in place?
Well, I mean, basic kinds of things, banning chokeholds, making sure that when there's an allegation of police misconduct, that a disinterested, neutral prosecutor will look at the case and make a determination as to whether charges ought to be brought. A reform of the whole doctrine of qualified immunity that allows bad cops to get away without being held responsible. We need to come up with better training in terms of dealing with this whole questions of implicit and unconscious bias. I think testing of people who want to be police officers. Not everybody who is smart and and gifted in a lot of ways should be a cop. That's a difficult job, and so I think testing people to make sure that they have both the right the right worldview, as well as the makeup that's going to be needed to be a person who acts in a fair way under under a lot of pressure. So there's a lot of really concrete things that I think that can be done. The House of Representatives in Congress here in Washington D.C. has already passed a bill that I think goes a long way to making better our criminal justice system, especially with regard to policing. My hope would be that the Senate will look at it, pass it, and then this president or the next one would sign it.
And the voices of these students have to be heard. And they have to understand that they have the power to make a difference. As you said, the founders were young people. And so one person taking a step forward, getting others to join together, so critical. And they're interested in various aspects of serving the public. And you've talked about 6 things really in terms of public service and how they can move the ball forward and what your philosophy is. And part of that is, as you said, being a lawyer is a privilege, a blessing, and all lawyers are public servants, which means?
Well, it means that you have a responsibility as a lawyer to the society that gives you great amounts of power and privileges. If you accept that power and if you accept those privileges, you also have to accept the responsibility that you have to give back. Lawyers have a really disproportionate amount of influence in our country. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, because I think lawyers are trained well. People who tend to become lawyers have a sense of social responsibility. But I think that lawyers should always be asking themselves that question. We should not get so consumed with our jobs and so consumed with what our objectives are in private practice or government jobs, whatever. But every now and again to step back and to ask ourselves, what is it that I need to be doing as a lawyer to make this country better? What can I do as a lawyer to make the system more fair? What is it that I can do as a lawyer to make this country more just? There are legal skills that only lawyers possess, in ways in which we know the system that only lawyers possess. And we have to use those special gifts, those special talents, those special skills in a way to make this country better. And I'm confident that, with these young lawyers and law students that Equal Justice works with, that if we train them in the way that Equal Justice Works does, that we can have a cadre new committed lawyers, socially responsible lawyers that'll make this nation, all that it can and should be, all that it must be.
And when they run into hard places, doors that are closed, rocks that seem not to be movable, one of the things you've said is you have to believe in yourself, you have to trust your instincts, and you have to honor those that went before. Could you speak to that hard road? Because the road is not easy. And why you haven't given up?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that's right. The reality is that in the fight for justice, progress doesn't move in a linear fashion. There are going to be setbacks. There are going to be failures. And we learn probably more from our failures than we do our successes. But lawyers have to be prepared for that in the way that generations before us had to be prepared. Thurgood Marshall, won great decisions as a lawyer, but he also lost cases. John Lewis, was responsible in a lot of ways for the successes of the civil rights movement, but there were failures along the way. And if you think about the things that they had to deal with, the threats to their lives, Thurgood Marshall trying cases in the segregated South, standing up for Black defendants. That's, he's literally putting his life on the line. And if he could do something like that, we can certainly deal with the situation that we have to deal with here in 21st century America. But always understanding that, the measure of success is whether or not people are going to be committed, whether or not they're going to persevere in the light of the failures that undoubtedly will come. It took a long time for us to get to where we are and all the problems that we are dealing with. It'll take, some amount of time to work our way out of them. And so it's not only, we're not going to have things happen overnight. It's not like we're going to, have all the problems in this country solved within the next couple of weeks. It'll take time. Doesn't mean that we shouldn't agitate for change as quickly as is possible. I'm always saying that we don't want to defer things for too long, but people have to be prepared for unexpected challenges and not desired failures. But if you take those in stride and use that to not make you feel down or feel despair, but to really rise to the challenge and give you a sense of determination, that's the thing that ultimately guarantees success.
And so, as you've said, the task is formidable, but it is one that we working together can accomplish. And we're so grateful that you have not given up. We're so grateful that you want to work and to get this new birth of freedom. We're so grateful that you have led us and taken so many steps in the direction of freedom. And in your lifetime of public service, believe in America and the American dream and believe in young people and what they can contribute. So thank you so much for sharing this time with us. We know how busy you are, and it's a real blessing to have you in the Equal Justice Works family. Thank you.
Thank you, Judge. Always good to see you.
All right. And now I'm going to open it up, Attorney General Holder, to the students. So they have some very good questions for you.
Okay.
My name is Graham Ball, and my question to you is based on all the experience you've learned throughout your years of practice. What advice would you give to yourself when you graduated law school? If you could go back in time, what advice would you give to yourself when you graduated law school?
Well, I think the first thing I'd probably tell myself is get a haircut. I had an afro that was way too long. But beyond that, I think I would reassure that third-year law student that my inclination to want to do things and experiment in my career was a wise decision. That you want to follow your heart when you first get out of law school and try a variety of things to make up your mind about how you ultimately want to practice. And so other people were, going to big law firms and to corporations. I decided to go to the Justice Department, and the decision that I made then, which seemed a little, different, maybe a little gutsy, was the right one. So I'd go back and reassure young Eric that get a haircut and follow your gut.
Hi, my name is Rena. I'm a 3L at Temple University BC School of Law. And fun fact is I interned at the DOJ in the Executive Office for Immigration Review for the past 2 summers, and I really enjoyed my experience and I learned a lot, and I'm really grateful for the opportunity I had to intern there. And so my question is, for law students who aspire to one day become judges, hold leadership positions within agencies and nonprofits, or perhaps to even run for office one day, what advice would you give them for working towards and achieving these long-term goals?
Well, I think you want to get a breadth of experience to the extent that you can. Again, follow your heart, be involved in the kind of law that really speaks to you. But then also be involved in organizations beyond what it is you're doing during your regular work day. Be involved with community organizations, political organizations. Really amp up your civic responsibility and your civic activities. I think in that way you're exposing yourself to other people. You get known by other people, but you also get a wide range of experiences that will help inform you about ideas you have with regard to policy, how government works, how community organizations interact with one another. I think you want to, especially as a young lawyer, you want to pack as much as you can into your day.
Thank you so much for being here today. My name is Bria Nelson. My pronouns are they or she, and I'm a 3L at the University of Kansas School of Law. My question is, there are profound racial and economic disparities at every level of our justice system, from arrest, charging, and bail decisions to conviction, sentencing, and federal executions. How can lawyers and other legal advocates help reduce these disparities, and what are some ways that they can help improve trust and confidence in our justice system, especially during the current administration?
Well, I think there are no questions that there are disparities and there are inequities in the criminal justice system, but we shouldn't be surprised by that. This is a country that is dealing with problems of systemic racism. So if you look at any component of our society, you're going to find, racial inequality. And so, I hope that people don't think if we fix the criminal justice system, which will be a substantial achievement, if we fix the criminal justice system, everything's done, because we still have a bunch of inequities to deal with in other parts of our society as well. But I think lawyers can play, an important role in that regard. Especially you all as young people, I would urge you to think about maybe different careers. Maybe a lot of you don't think I want to be a prosecutor. I want to work, for the state. I want to work for the federal government. And I would urge you to think about doing exactly that, because then you're going to be in a position to make the decisions about who gets charged with what penalties will you seek. And in that way, on a case-by-case basis, you have the ability to make sure that justice is done. And as you get that experience, you'll undoubtedly rise in the organizations that you are a part of, and then you have the ability to start making policy determinations. So I think that by broadening your experiences and thinking about getting involved in governmental organizations, you can certainly help in that way. But beyond that, you also have to advocate. I think lawyers have a special responsibility to advocate for justice. And so beyond that, what you do during your regular day, I would urge you to be involved in civic organizations, and other organizations that are advocating for the kinds of changes that we need. We have a moment right now, with all the demonstrations that we have seen. But the question is, are we going to take that energy and channel it and come up with the kinds of substantive, long-lasting changes that this nation has needed for too long? I'm cautiously optimistic, but nothing is promised. It'll only happen if we all work to make it happen.
Hi, Mr. Holder. My name is Javier DeGena, and I am a 2L at Golden Gate University School of Law. Thank you for your time and for everything that you've done to advance civil rights in this country and beyond. My question is about the role of the prosecutor. Considering the current moment and climate in the Attorney General's office, what should the role of the prosecutor be when they are asked to enforce the law in ways that clash with their conscience, with their values, or understanding of the legal system? And also, what would you do if you were a young attorney at the current Attorney General's office being asked to exercise this power in ways that you oppose?
Well, what I always told everybody who worked for me when I was either the United States Attorney, the Deputy Attorney General, or the Attorney General of the United States, whenever we finished a meeting, I would tell everybody, and they got used to hearing it from me, go out there and do justice. And what I meant by that was to make sure that in every case that they were a part of and every decision that they were making, that they were doing the right thing. And if you are a prosecutor and you're in a case and you're getting pressure from other people to make determinations or make decisions that you're not comfortable with, you shouldn't make them. That is what your responsibility is as a prosecutor, to only do what's right in the case that you have the responsibility for. And so people have to be willing to potentially sacrifice their jobs and not take advice or direction that is going to make you do something that is inappropriate or inconsistent with your your value system. And that's why, again, it is so important for people of right minds to be in leadership positions. Now, if you're at the Justice Department now and you're being ordered to do something by an attorney general or his subordinates that you don't agree with, I think you should refuse to do it and be prepared to suffer whatever the consequences might be. At the end of the day, no job is worth sacrificing your conscience for. When I was at the Justice Department, you have the ability to hang the portraits of 4 of your predecessors. And one of the people who I had up there was Elliot Richardson, who was the Attorney General under Richard Nixon. And when Nixon told him to fire the Watergate special prosecutor and he didn't want to do it, he resigned rather than fire the Watergate special prosecutor. And that portrait was there to remind me that as great a job as it was being Attorney General, as much as I liked the job, there might come a time when I'd have to tell the president or somebody else that I wasn't going to do that which he wanted me to do, and I would resign or allow myself to be fired. And that we can never, ever lose that. Prosecutors have great amounts of power, and they have to use that power wisely and consistent with our values and consistent with their internal values.
It's such a joy to hear about your life and your experiences. So thank you so much for being willing to share them with us. My name is Chantal Matike, and I'm in my 3rd year at Lincoln Memorial Duncan School of Law. And my question for you today is, what do you believe are the greatest challenges currently facing the legal system in the United States? And how can attorneys, advocates, and law students like us most effectively and strategically perhaps address these challenges?
Well, I think the biggest challenge today is the one that has put thousands of Americans into the streets right now, the racial inequities and inequalities that we see in our criminal justice system. I think that is, that's the primary challenge. But it's not only the criminal justice system, it's the civil system as well, where too many people have inadequate representation when they are in the civil courts and dealing with really kind of life-changing issues, whether it's landlord-tenant disputes, child custody disputes. In a lot of those cases, people go into court unrepresented, and that's inconsistent with how we think our judicial system is supposed to operate. So I think there's a resource problem with regard to our justice system, and I think with regard to the criminal justice system, there are certainly problems of inequality, discrimination, and then racism that I think we as a nation have been too willing not to focus on, and it's time. It's past time for us to confront these issues. But not only to confront these issues and to talk about them and to march against them, but to come up with concrete and long-lasting solutions to them.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Holder. Thank you, Judge Williams.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening.
Thank you.
Go out there and change the world.